There are hidden corners scattered throughout the Pokémon world where quiet design choices were made and slowly forgotten. Text speeds that change for a single character, paths that block you in one version of the game, yet quietly open in another, and sprite errors that slipped through testing all linger just beneath the surface. Some were simple mistakes that never got fixed, while others were deliberate choices that shaped how certain moments felt without us ever realizing why. Sometimes that feeling comes from a small Pokemon whose story is told through a cracked bone mask and what's never said out loud. Tonight, we're drifting through obscure details, the kind that only reveal themselves when you notice them. Before we drift any further, make sure to subscribe to never miss an upload. In the story of Pokémon Black and White, there's a character named N who carries himself differently than anyone else you encounter. His presence feels urgent somehow, like he knows exactly what he wants to say and refuses to waste a single second getting there. Game Freak built this feeling into the game through a hidden mechanic that most players never consciously notice but absolutely feel. Whenever N appears on screen and begins speaking, his text speed is automatically set to the fastest possible setting, completely ignoring whatever speed you've chosen in your options menu. Even if you've selected the slowest text crawl, N's words still rush past at maximum velocity. This subtle choice creates a subconscious impression of conviction and certainty, as if his thoughts move too quickly to be slowed down by normal conversation rhythms. The effect is quiet, but persistent, shaping how players perceive his character without ever announcing itself. You don't realize the game is doing this to you, but something about talking to N feels different from talking to anyone else. His dialogue carries weight because it moves with purpose, never pausing, never hesitating, always driving forward toward whatever truth he believes he's discovered. This kind of design sits at the intersection of storytelling and programming, where mechanics become narrative tools without the player ever seeing the machinery at work. It's the sort of decision that requires someone to care deeply about how a character should feel, not just what they should say. Beyond the text speed, Black and White hide even more layers of detail around N's character. Throughout the game, there are moments where you can receive some of his Pokémon, creatures like Zorua or Darmanitan, that he once traveled with before your paths crossed. If you choose to add these Pokémon to your team and carry them with you as you continue through the story, N will acknowledge their presence when you meet him again. He has unique dialogue programmed specifically for these encounters, lines that only trigger if those exact Pokémon are in your party at that moment. The game remembers which of his companions you've taken in, and N remembers too. This creates an emotional through line that most players will never experience because they don't realize the option exists. You could play through Black and White a dozen times and never see these hidden conversations, never hear N speak about the Pokémon you're carrying that once belonged to him. The developers built entire branches of dialogue that only appear under very specific circumstances, moments of recognition and loss that add depth to a character who already stands apart from everyone else in the narrative. It's the kind of attention to detail that suggests someone on the development team genuinely cared about making N feel real, not just scripted. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, it becomes clear that obscure details like these aren't mistakes or accidents. They're intentional choices made by people who understood that tiny adjustments to pacing and recognition could transform a character from memorable to unforgettable. N's text speed and his hidden dialogue exist in a space where most players will never consciously notice them, but where everyone will feel their effects. The urgency, the weight, the sense that this character is somehow different, it all comes from mechanics working quietly beneath the surface. In the third generation games, there's a location called Victory Road, where players navigate through dark caves and challenging trainers on their way to the Pokémon League. Ruby and Sapphire featured a basement floor in this location with a specific ledge near a ladder that, if jumped over, would force you to take a long detour just to return to where you started. It's a small frustration, the kind of design choice that makes you wonder if anyone tested this section before releasing the game. What makes this ledge particularly interesting is that it only exists in certain versions. The Japanese and English releases of Ruby and Sapphire both feature this annoying ledge exactly as described, requiring players to navigate around it or accept the consequences of jumping down. However, in the Spanish, Italian, French, and German versions of these same games, someone decided to fix the problem. The ledge was cut in half, removing the detour entirely and making that section of Victory Road slightly less frustrating for players in those regions. This wasn't a bug or a glitch. It was a deliberate design change made between the initial release and the localized versions. Someone at Game Freak or one of the localization teams looked at that ledge, recognized it as poor level design, and chose to alter it for other language releases. What's curious is that they never went back and patched the Japanese or English versions, leaving players in those regions to deal with the original frustrating layout. This kind of regional variation reveals how game development actually works in practice. Different teams handle different versions, and sometimes improvements made in one region never make it back to the others. The ledge in Victory Road exists in a state of simultaneous presence and absence, depending on which cartridge you're holding. For some players, it's a minor annoyance they remember years later. For others, it never existed at all. The game's geography shifts depending on language, creating parallel versions of the same location that differ in small but meaningful ways. Another quiet oddity appears in Mahogany Town during the second-generation games. If you look carefully at the town map from above, there's a visual error that's easy to miss unless someone points it out directly. One of the trees in the town has its top portion slightly cropped off, cutting away part of the sprite for no apparent reason. It's not a functional problem. The tree doesn't break the game or cause any issues with navigation. It's simply an aesthetic mistake, a small oversight in how the map tiles were arranged when the town was designed. The cropped tree sits there in every version of gold, silver, and crystal, visible to anyone who looks closely enough, but insignificant enough that most players will never notice it exists. Errors like this are fascinating because they reveal the human element behind game development. Someone placed that tree sprite on the map, and either they didn't notice the cropping issue, or they did notice but decided it wasn't important enough to fix before the game shipped. It's possible the error was caught during testing, but deemed too minor to warrant delaying the release. Or perhaps it slipped through entirely, lost among thousands of other visual elements that needed to be checked and verified. Either way, the cropped tree in Mahogany Town has existed for over 2 decades now, a tiny imperfection frozen in the code of games that millions of people have played. These small mistakes accumulate over the course of a game's development, each one representing a decision point where someone chose not to fix something. Sometimes it's because the fix would take too long, sometimes because the error is barely visible, and sometimes because there are bigger problems demanding attention. The cropped tree doesn't matter in any practical sense, but it matters in the way all small details matter when you're trying to understand how a game was actually made. It's a fingerprint, a moment where the process became visible. In gold, silver, and crystal, the move Sonic Boom uses 2 different battle animations, depending on whether you're playing the Japanese version or the international release. The Japanese version displays one specific animation that would go on to become the standard representation of Sonic Boom in every game that followed. It's a clean, consistent visual that matches what players would expect from a move with that name. However, the international version made a strange choice during localization. Instead of keeping the Japanese animation, Sonic Boom was given the animation for Gust, a completely different move with a different type and different visual identity. There's no clear reason why this change was made. What makes this even more puzzling is that the switch was temporary. Every game after Crystal reverted back to the original Japanese animation, making the international version of Generation 2 games the only place where Sonic Boom looks like Gust. It's possible this was a simple error during the localization process, someone accidentally swapping animation files or misidentifying which move was which. Or perhaps there was a technical reason that made more sense at the time, but has since been lost to memory. Either way, the result is that Sonic Boom exists in two different visual forms depending on which version of the game you're experiencing. Animation swaps like this might seem trivial, but they affect how players understand the moves they're using. Visual consistency helps build a mental library of what each attack should look and feel like. When Sonic Boom suddenly looks identical to Gust, it creates a subtle confusion, a sense that something isn't quite right, even if you can't articulate what's wrong. The fact that this version of the animation only appears in a specific subset of games makes it a historical oddity, a brief moment where the localization team made a choice that was later deemed incorrect and quietly corrected in all future releases. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we start to see patterns in how these errors emerge. Sometimes they're visual, sometimes they're mechanical, and sometimes they're animation-based, like Sonic Boom's temporary identity crisis. Each one represents a different kind of oversight, a different way that the complex process of making a game can produce unexpected results. The animation swap might not matter to someone playing casually, but it matters to anyone trying to understand the full history of how these moves have been represented across different games and regions. Generation 5 introduced its own collection of sprite errors, small visual mistakes that only become apparent when you examine the character sheets used to animate Pokémon in battle. Slowbro's sprite is one of the more interesting examples. During its battle animation, the Shelder clamped onto its tail rotates and moves, but the angle and positioning make it impossible to see certain parts of the shell. When you look at the actual character sheet used to create this animation, you discover that the Shelder is missing its left eye entirely. The eye was never drawn because the animators knew it would never be visible during normal gameplay. This is a practical decision that makes perfect sense from a development standpoint. Why spend time drawing details that no one will ever see? The animation works fine without the left eye, and most players would never know it was missing. However, if you watch Slowbro's animation carefully and pay attention to the moments where the Shelder rotates, you can occasionally catch glimpses of where that eye should be. There's a visual gap, a sense that something's absent even though you might not be able to identify exactly what. The missing eye becomes noticeable once you know to look for it, transforming from an invisible efficiency into a visible flaw. Arbok has a similar issue in Generation 5. Its battle sprite is missing a small segment of its tail, a detail that's easy to overlook until you compare the front and back sprites. The front view shows Arbok without a particular line that should connect one segment of its patterned tail to another. Meanwhile, the back sprite includes that missing segment, proving that its absence from the front view was an error rather than an intentional design choice. Someone forgot to draw that one small line when creating the sprite, and no one caught the mistake before the game was released. The error is subtle enough that most players will never notice it, but once you know it's there, it's impossible to ignore. You start looking for that missing tail segment every time Arbok appears, wondering why no one fixed it in later updates or re-releases. These kinds of sprite errors accumulate across a game as large and complex as Pokémon, each one representing a tiny moment where attention slipped or time ran short. They're not game-breaking, but they're permanent, frozen into the visual identity of these creatures in a specific generation. Darmanitan in Zen mode presents another sprite issue from Generation 5. In its normal form, Darmanitan has distinctive squiggly marks on its back that help identify it visually. However, when it transforms into Zen mode during battle, the back sprite becomes completely blank. The squiggly marks disappear entirely, leaving a smooth, unmarked surface that doesn't match how Darmanitan is supposed to look in that form. This wasn't an intentional design choice, as evidenced by the fact that the anime depicts Zen mode Darmanitan with its back markings intact, and every game after Generation 5 corrected the sprite to include them. The blank back sprite exists only in black, white, black 2, and white 2, making it another temporary error that was eventually fixed but never retroactively corrected in the original games. It's the kind of mistake that suggests the sprite artist either forgot to add the markings or assumed they wouldn't be necessary, since players rarely see the back view during normal gameplay. Whatever the reason, Zen mode Darmanitan spent an entire generation looking different than it was supposed to, and most players probably never realized anything was wrong. These sprite errors from Generation 5 share a common thread. They're all cases where details were either forgotten or deliberately omitted under the assumption they wouldn't matter. Missing eyes, missing tail segments, missing back markings, each one represents a small gap between how the Pokémon was designed and how it actually appeared in the game. The errors weren't caught during development, weren't fixed during testing, and only became apparent when players and researchers started examining the games more closely years after release. In the Korean version of Pokémon Gold and Silver, there's a peculiar text formatting error that appears when certain moves are used in battle. Specifically, when Thunder is used, the text that appears on screen includes an extra space between the word lightning and the exclamation point that follows it. This isn't a translation issue or a gameplay problem. It's purely a spacing error, a single extra character inserted where it shouldn't be. The Korean localization team either didn't notice the error or didn't consider it significant enough to warrant fixing before the game was released to that region. Text formatting errors like this are incredibly minor, the kind of thing that only becomes visible when you're specifically looking for differences between language versions. Most players would never notice an extra space, and even if they did, they probably wouldn't think much of it. But these small inconsistencies reveal how localization works in practice. Each language version of a Pokémon game is handled by different teams working under different constraints, and sometimes tiny errors slip through that wouldn't exist in the original Japanese release. The extra space in Thunder's text is unique to Korean Gold and Silver, making it a regional oddity that exists nowhere else in the franchise. This particular discovery was made by a researcher who specializes in finding these kinds of minute differences between game versions. The fact that someone noticed a single extra space in a move's text string speaks to the level of detail some players bring to studying these games. It's not enough to simply play through the story and catch Pokémon. Some people want to understand every variation, every regional difference, every small choice made during localization that resulted in games that are almost but not quite identical across languages. The extra space in Thunder's Korean text is meaningless in isolation, but as part of a larger pattern of regional variations, It helps paint a picture of how complex and fragmented the development and localization process actually was. Before Generation 5, the moves Self-Destruct and Explosion functioned in a way that seems strange when you first learn about it. Both moves are known for dealing massive damage by sacrificing the user, and their base power stats were listed as extremely high numbers to reflect this. However, the actual damage calculation didn't work the way it appeared to. Instead of using their listed base power directly, these moves had a hidden mechanic where they halved the opponent's defense stat before calculating damage. This meant the effective power was much lower than the numbers suggested, but the end result felt appropriately devastating because defense was being cut in half. The reason for this unusual implementation comes down to technical limitations. Storing a move's base power as 400 or 500 would have required too much memory for just 2 moves in the earlier games. By using a lower base power and having defense instead, the developers achieved the same damage output while using less data. It's a clever workaround, the kind of solution programmers find when they're working within strict memory constraints and need to make every byte count. The mechanic worked perfectly from a gameplay perspective, but the underlying math was completely different from what players assumed when they saw those high base power numbers. This hidden calculation method existed for multiple generations before being changed in Black and White, where Self-Destruct and Explosion were recalibrated to work more straightforwardly. The defense halving mechanic was removed, and the moves were given new base power values that actually reflected how the damage was being calculated. For players who had been using these moves for years, the change was mostly invisible. The moves still did heavy damage and still knocked out the user. But for anyone interested in the underlying mechanics, the shift from a hidden defense reduction to a standard damage calculation represented a significant change in how the game's code handled these particular attacks. The choice to initially use defense halving instead of higher base power values reveals how much creativity went into working around hardware limitations. The developers couldn't waste memory on larger numbers, so they found a different path to the same destination. It's the kind of elegant solution that only becomes visible when you start digging into how damage calculations actually work behind the scenes. Most players will never know or care about the difference, but for those who study game mechanics, it's a fascinating glimpse into the practical challenges of programming a game on limited hardware. On November 14, 2014, the day Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were released, the Pokémon Company began distributing a special event Pokémon through Wi-Fi. Players who downloaded the game on launch day and connected to the internet could receive a shiny Beldum holding a Metagrossite, a Pokémon that had belonged to the character Steven Stone in the game's story. The distribution ran for several months, giving plenty of people the opportunity to add this creature to their teams during their playthrough. It was a generous giveaway, the kind of event that made players feel rewarded for picking up the game early. However, there's a detail about this event Beldum that many players might not have noticed depending on when they received it. If you obtained the Beldum at the very beginning of your game, before accumulating much playtime, it came with the move Hold Back, an event-exclusive move that functions similarly to False Swipe. But if you waited until later in your playthrough to download the Beldum, after your game had registered a certain amount of time played, the Beldum would know Zen Headbutt instead. The game checked your total playtime and adjusted the Beldum's moveset accordingly, creating 2 different versions of the same event Pokémon depending on when you claimed it. This time-based variation wasn't announced or explained anywhere in the event's promotional materials. Players who received the Beldum early might never know that a later version existed with a different move, and players who received it later might not realize they missed out on Holdback. The mechanic created an invisible fork in the event, a branching path that players traveled without knowing they were making a choice. It's the kind of hidden detail that only becomes apparent when people start comparing their event Pokémon and realize they're not quite identical. The fact that the game tracked playtime and used it to determine which moveset to give reveals a level of complexity in how event distributions were programmed. Someone had to write code that checked your save file's total hours, compared it against a threshold, and selected the appropriate moveset based on that comparison. It's not a complicated system, but it's also not necessary for a simple event distribution. The developers could have just given everyone the same Beldum with the same moves. Instead, they chose to create variation to make the event slightly different depending on when you engaged with it during your playthrough. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we start to see how event Pokémon often carried hidden layers of programming that most players never encountered. The Shiny Beldum's time-based moveset is just one example of how distributions could be more complex than they appeared on the surface. These hidden mechanics didn't fundamentally change the experience of receiving the Pokémon, but they added texture and variation to events that might otherwise have felt identical for everyone who participated. In the original Pokémon Red and Blue, there's a peculiar data structure buried in the game's code that was discovered years after release. Every Pokémon in the game has a hidden cry pitch value that determines how their voice sounds when they appear in battle or in menus. Most Pokémon have unique values that were carefully chosen to match their design and personality. However, 3 Pokémon in Generation 1 share the exact same cry pitch, an unusual coincidence in a game where variety was typically prioritized. These 3 Pokémon are Poliwag, Ditto, and Poliwrath. The shared cry pitch creates an audible connection between these 3 creatures that players might not consciously notice, but can definitely hear if they pay attention. Poliwag's cry sounds similar to Ditto's, and both echo in Poliwrath's deeper voice. This wasn't necessarily intentional design meant to suggest some hidden relationship between them. It's more likely a coincidence, or a result of how cry pitches were assigned during development. Still, the fact that Ditto, a Pokémon known for its transformative abilities and mysterious origins, shares a cry pitch with the Poliwag evolutionary line has fueled speculation among players who enjoy connecting dots in the game's code. Cry pitch values are one of many hidden numerical attributes assigned to every Pokémon, most of which have no impact on gameplay, but contribute to how each creature feels and sounds. The developers had to assign these values to hundreds of Pokémon, and in the process, some ended up sharing characteristics that create accidental connections. The Poliwag Ditto Poliwrath cry pitch coincidence is exactly that, an accident that looks like it might mean something but probably doesn't. It's the kind of detail that only emerges when people start examining the raw data files and comparing values across the entire roster. What makes this interesting isn't whether the connection was intentional, but rather that players care enough to look for these patterns in the first place. Cry pitches are invisible during normal gameplay. You hear the result, but you don't see the number behind it. Yet someone went through the game's data, extracted every cry pitch value, and noticed that these 3 Pokémon matched. That level of attention reveals how deeply some players engage with these games, searching for meaning in places where meaning might not actually exist, but could theoretically have been hidden. The Pokémon anime introduced Ash's Pikachu in the very first episode, establishing it as the face of the franchise and one of the most recognizable characters in gaming history. However, Pikachu's portrayal in the anime differs from its stats and behavior in the games in several notable ways. In the show, Pikachu is depicted as exceptionally powerful, capable of taking down much larger and theoretically stronger Pokémon through determination and bond with its trainer. This portrayal influenced how many players perceived Pikachu when they encountered it in the games, even though the actual stats don't support the anime's version of events. In the games, Pikachu is a mid-tier electric type with decent speed but relatively low attack and defense stats. It's perfectly usable for a casual playthrough, but it's not particularly powerful compared to other electric types available in most games. The anime created an expectation that Pikachu should be strong, and Game Freak responded to this expectation in interesting ways over the years. Pikachu was given access to exclusive items like the Light Ball, which doubles its attack and special attack when held. This item exists specifically to make Pikachu viable in competitive contexts, closing the gap between its actual stats and its perceived strength based on the anime. The Light Ball is a fascinating example of how the games and anime influenced each other. The anime made Pikachu famous and powerful, and the games responded by creating a mechanic that allowed Pikachu to actually be powerful if you chose to use it. Without the Light Ball, Pikachu would remain a cute but relatively weak Pokémon that most players would evolve into Raichu for better stats. With the Light Ball, Pikachu becomes a legitimate threat, capable of hitting harder than Raichu while maintaining its iconic unevolved form. The item bridges the gap between media, allowing the game version of Pikachu to live up to the anime version's reputation. This relationship between the anime and the games created a unique situation where a Pokémon's cultural importance began influencing its mechanical design. Pikachu wasn't given special treatment because it was strong in the games. It was given special treatment because it was culturally significant. The Light Ball exists because millions of people around the world recognize Pikachu and expect it to be powerful. Game Freak responded to that expectation by creating a tool that made it true, even though the base stats never changed. In Pokémon Stadium for the Nintendo 64, there's a hidden detail in how Pokémon are displayed during battles that most players would never notice without specifically looking for it. When a Pokémon appears on screen, the game renders it as a three-dimensional model rather than the two-dimensional sprites used in the Game Boy games. These models were groundbreaking at the time, offering the first fully polygonal representations of Pokémon that players could see in full three-dimensional space. However, not all the models were created with the same level of detail. Some Pokémon models in Stadium were given highly detailed textures and animations with attention paid to every scale, feather, or fur pattern. Others received much simpler treatment, with flat colors and minimal texture work. The disparity in model quality wasn't random. It corresponded roughly to how popular or prominent each Pokémon was expected to be. Starter Pokémon, legendaries, and fan favorites received more detailed models, while less popular or rarely used Pokémon got simpler representations. This was a practical decision driven by time and resource constraints. The development team couldn't give every single Pokémon the same level of detail, so they prioritized the ones players were most likely to use. The result is that Stadium's Pokémon models exist on a spectrum of visual quality. If you're using Charizard or Mewtwo, you're seeing some of the best modeling work the game has to offer. If you're using a more obscure Pokémon, like Sunflora or Quillfish, you're getting a functional but less impressive model. This difference is subtle during normal gameplay, when you're focused on choosing moves and winning battles. But if you pause and examine the models closely, the variation in texture detail and animation complexity becomes apparent. This approach to model quality reveals the realities of game development on the Nintendo 64, where polygon budgets and texture memory were both strictly limited. The team had to make choices about where to invest their time and resources, and they chose to focus on the Pokémon they expected players to care about most. It's a pragmatic solution that resulted in a better overall game, even if it meant some Pokémon didn't receive the same visual treatment as others. The hidden hierarchy of model quality in Stadium reflects broader patterns in how game developers allocate resources under constraints. In Pokémon Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness for the GameCube, there's an unusual save file corruption glitch that can occur under very specific circumstances. If a player saves their game while standing in a particular location and then attempts to load that save file on a different memory card, the game can fail to recognize the save data correctly. This results in either a corrupted file that won't load or a file that loads, but places the player character in an incorrect location with broken collision detection. The glitch is rare because it requires transferring save data between memory cards, something most players never did. However, for players who did transfer their saves, perhaps to play on a friend's console or to back up their progress, the corruption glitch could result in lost hours of gameplay. The problem stemmed from how Colosseum and XD stored location data in the save file. The games used a coordinate system that referenced specific points in the game world, and when that data was loaded onto a different memory card with slightly different formatting, the coordinates could become misaligned. The game would try to place the player character at the saved coordinates, but those coordinates no longer pointed to a valid location, resulting in the character spawning inside walls or falling through the floor into empty space. Game Freak never officially acknowledged this glitch or released a patch to fix it. The issue was too rare to warrant major attention, affecting only a small subset of players who happened to transfer their saves in exactly the wrong way. For most people, Colosseum and XD worked perfectly fine, and the save file corruption glitch remained an obscure footnote in the game's history. But for the players who encountered it, the glitch was devastating, potentially destroying save files that represented dozens of hours of progress. The lack of an official fix meant that players had to learn through word of mouth to avoid transferring saves or to only transfer them while standing in safe locations. This glitch illustrates the fragility of save data in older games, where file corruption could occur for reasons that had nothing to do with the player's actions. Modern games typically include more robust error checking and recovery systems to prevent this kind of data loss. But Colosseum and XD were developed in an era when save systems were less sophisticated, and unusual edge cases like memory card transfers could expose vulnerabilities that weren't anticipated during testing. The corruption glitch exists as a reminder that game saves are just data files, and data files can break when handled in unexpected ways. The Pokémon trading card game for the Game Boy Color includes a hidden mechanic related to how the AI opponents build and use their decks. Each AI trainer in the game has a predefined deck list that they'll use during battles, but the game also includes a randomization element that slightly varies which cards they actually draw and play. This creates the illusion that the AI is making strategic decisions, when in reality, it's following a script with some random variation to keep battles from feeling completely identical every time you face the same opponent. The randomization is subtle enough that most players won't notice the pattern, but predictable enough that experienced players can learn to anticipate what the AI will do. What's interesting about this system is how it balances consistency and variety. If the AI always played the exact same cards in the exact same order, battles would become trivial once you figured out the pattern. But if the AI was truly random, it might make nonsensical plays that broke the illusion of facing a thinking opponent. The trading card game's solution was to give each AI a fixed deck and strategy, then add just enough randomness to make each battle feels slightly different. The AI will generally try to play its strongest cards and make reasonable decisions, but the specific order and timing will vary from battle to battle. This kind of semi-random AI behavior is common in older games, where processing power wasn't sufficient to create genuinely intelligent opponents. The developers had to fake strategic thinking through a combination of scripts and randomness, hoping that players wouldn't notice the smoke and mirrors. In the trading card game, this approach works remarkably well. The AI feels competent without being unfair, and battles remain engaging even after you've figured out the general patterns. The hidden randomization mechanic makes the game more replayable than it would be if every battle was completely deterministic. For players who study the game deeply enough to understand how the AI works, the illusion breaks down. You start to see the patterns, to recognize which cards each opponent favors and how they'll typically respond to your moves. But for most players experiencing the game casually, the AI feels smart enough to be challenging without being frustratingly difficult. That balance, achieved through hidden randomization, layered over scripted decks, represents effective game design working quietly beneath the surface to create a satisfying experience. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. In Pokémon Emerald, there's a location called the Battle Pyramid that operates differently from most other battle facilities in the series. Instead of selecting your own team, you're given a random selection of rental Pokémon to use during your challenge. The rental pool includes fully evolved Pokémon at high levels, species you typically wouldn't encounter in the wild until much later in the game, or in some cases not at all without trading. What makes the Battle Pyramid particularly unique is that these rental Pokémon can be shiny, appearing with their alternate color palettes and the telltale sparkle animation when they're sent into battle. However, there's a cruel irony to this feature. Because you're using rental Pokémon that don't belong to you, there's no way to capture them even if you encounter a shiny. You don't have access to your bag or any Pokeballs during Battle Pyramid runs, meaning a shiny rental Pokémon is something you can use temporarily but never actually keep. The game gives you these rare, valuable creatures for a few battles and then takes them away, leaving you with nothing but the memory of what you briefly held. For players who value shinies, encountering one in the Battle Pyramid is bittersweet at best. The existence of shiny rental Pokémon in the Battle Pyramid feels almost taunting. Game Freak programmed the possibility of these creatures appearing, knowing full well that players couldn't keep them. It's possible this was an oversight, that no one on the development team considered whether it made sense to allow shinies in a context where they couldn't be captured. Or perhaps it was intentional, a way to show players what these rare creatures looked like without actually giving them the opportunity to obtain them legitimately. Either way, the result is a feature that creates frustration rather than excitement for anyone lucky or unlucky enough to encounter a shiny they can't keep. There is, however, a workaround that some players have discovered. Through the use of cheat devices like Action Replay or R4 cards, it's possible to modify your game to allow access to Pokeballs during Battle Pyramid challenges. With this modification, shiny rental Pokémon become capturable, transforming the Battle Pyramid into a unique, shiny hunting location. Players using this method have documented catching shiny versions of fully evolved starters like Charizard and Blastoise, as well as other rare species like Metagross and Flygon. The modified Battle Pyramid becomes one of the only ways to obtain certain shiny Pokémon without going through the normal breeding or encounter processes. Alternatively, there's a glitch called the Pomeg glitch that can be exploited to obtain Pokeballs without using external cheat devices. This glitch requires specific setup and careful execution, but it achieves the same result, allowing players to access items they normally wouldn't have during battle pyramid runs. The glitch takes advantage of how the game handles HP values when certain berries are used, creating a cascade of errors that ultimately allow access to the bag. Once you can open your bag, you can use Pokeballs on rental Pokemon, including any shinies you encounter. The fact that players have gone to such lengths to capture Battle Pyramid shinies reveals how deeply some people engage with the shiny hunting aspect of Pokemon games. They're willing to use glitches and cheat devices to spend hours manipulating the game's systems, all for the chance to obtain creatures that the developers never intended them to have. The Battle Pyramid's shiny rental Pokemon exist in a liminal space between official feature and unintended consequence, something the game allows but doesn't support, something players can experience but aren't supposed to keep. In Pokemon Rumble for WiiWare, there's a delightful hidden detail in the game's ending sequence that most players would only see once and might not even notice. During the credits, the camera pans across a scene showing various Pokemon gathered together, celebrating the completion of the game's story. These as background Pokemon are purely decorative, not interactive in any way, just part of the visual spectacle designed to make the ending feel more alive and populated. However, any of these background Pokemon have a chance to appear as shinies, showing their alternate colorations as they stand among the crowd. This feature is remarkable because it serves absolutely no gameplay purpose. The shinies in the credits can't be captured, can't be interacted with, and appear for only a brief moment as the camera moves past them. They exist purely as a visual treat, a tiny surprise for players who happen to be paying attention during what's typically a passive viewing experience. Most people probably watch the credits once, if at all, and wouldn't think to look closely at the background Pokemon to check if any are shiny. But the possibility is there, programmed into the game as an Easter egg that rewards careful observation. The only documented instances of credits, shinies in Pokemon Rumble are a shiny Golem and a shiny Goldeen, both captured on video by players who happened to notice the alternate colors and were recording at the time. It's likely that many more credits shinies have appeared over the years in playthroughs that weren't recorded or in games played by people who didn't realize what they were seeing. The rarity of these findings speaks to how subtle the feature is and how few players actually look closely at the credits sequence. It's the kind of detail that could easily exist in a game for years without anyone noticing. What makes this feature particularly charming is its pointlessness. Game Freak didn't need to program credits shinies. They serve no function, provide no reward, and most players will never see them. But someone on the development team decided it would be fun to include them anyway, to add one more layer of surprise to a game that was already full of colorful toy-like Pokemon. The credits shinies are a gift to players who pay attention, a small acknowledgement that even the ending sequence could be special if you looked closely enough. This kind of hidden detail represents game development at its most playful. The credits shinies don't exist because they're necessary or because they improve the game in any measurable way. They exist because someone thought it would be delightful, and that was reason enough to add them. In a medium often dominated by metrics and player retention strategies, these tiny moments of unnecessary charm stand out as reminders that games can include things simply because they're fun to discover. Throughout the Pokémon series, shinies have maintained a curious relationship with official lore and developer commentary. Despite being one of the most recognizable and pursued features in the games, shinies are rarely acknowledged within the game world itself. NPCs don't react to shiny Pokémon, the Pokédex doesn't mention them, and the story never addresses why some creatures appear in alternate colors while others don't. This silence creates a strange disconnection between how important shinies are to players and how invisible they are within the game's narratives. The developers have similarly avoided explaining shinies in detail through official channels. There's no canonical reason given for why shinies exist or what they represent in the Pokémon world. Are they genetic mutations? Rare color morphs? Something else entirely? The games don't say, and Game Freak has historically declined to provide definitive answers. This deliberate vagueness allows shinies to remain mysterious, a feature that players can interpret and understand in their own ways without being constrained by official explanations that might reduce their magic. This approach to shinies as unexplained phenomena creates space for player imagination and community speculation. Without official answers, players have developed their own theories about what shinies mean and why they exist. Some see them as truly rare genetic variations, others as glitches in the Pokémon world's natural order, and still others as something more spiritual or meaningful. The lack of canonical explanation allows all these interpretations to coexist, each adding its own layer of meaning to the experience of encountering a shiny. The decision to keep shinies mysterious also serves a practical purpose. By not explaining them, Game Freak avoids creating lore that might constrain future game design decisions. If shinies were canonically explained as one specific thing, it might limit how they could be implemented in future games, or what mechanics could be associated with them. By leaving them vague and undefined, the developers maintain maximum flexibility to adjust shiny rates, introduce new hunting methods, or change how shinies function without contradicting established lore. In Generation 1, before the concept of shinies officially existed, it's still possible to encounter Pokémon that will become shiny when traded to Generation 2 games. This works because of how shinies were determined in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Shininess in these games wasn't a separate flag or attribute. It was calculated based on the Pokémon's IV values, the hidden stats that determined its strength in various categories. If a Pokémon had exactly the right combination of IVs, it would display as shiny when viewed in a Generation 2 game. Since Generation 1, Pokémon also have IVs, and since those IVs are preserved when trading forward to Generation 2, it's theoretically possible to catch a Pokémon in red, blue, or yellow that has the correct IV combination to become shiny after transfer. Players who understand this mechanic can actively hunt for shinies in Generation 1 by catching Pokémon and checking their stats to see if they match the required values. It's a tedious process that requires knowledge of exactly which IV combinations produce shininess, but it's entirely possible to do with patience and dedication. What makes this even more interesting is that the IV-based shiny system in Generation 2 can be exploited to obtain shiny Johto Pokémon through Generation 1 games. Through specific glitches, players can manipulate the data in red, blue, or yellow to create Pokémon with index numbers and IV values that don't correspond to any legitimate Generation 1 species. These glitched Pokémon, often variations of Missing No, can be carefully constructed to match the exact specifications needed to become a specific Johto Pokémon with shiny appropriate IVs when traded to Generation 2. The process is complex and requires deep knowledge of how Generation 1 stores Pokémon data and how that data is interpreted when transferred to Generation 2. But the result is that players can obtain shiny Johto starters, shiny legendary beasts, or any other Generation 2 Pokémon as shinies by creating the appropriate glitch Pokémon in Generation 1 and trading it forward. The glitched creature transforms during the trade, becoming a legitimate Pokémon with all the correct attributes, including shininess. It's a fascinating exploit that bridges two generations, using the incompatibilities and quirks in how they handle data to create outcomes that weren't intended by the developers. This technique represents the kind of deep mechanical understanding that some players bring to these games. It's not enough to simply play through the story or even to hunt for shinies through normal methods. Some players want to break the systems, to find exploits and glitches that allow them to obtain things that should be impossible. The Generation 1 to Generation 2 shiny transfer glitch is exactly that, an impossible thing made possible through careful manipulation of how the games store and transfer data. It exists at the intersection of programming knowledge and Pokémon fandom, where an understanding code becomes a tool for achieving in-game goals. In Pokémon X and Y, there's a mechanic called Poké-Radar that allows players to chain encounters with the same species in order to increase the chances of finding a shiny. The chain builds as long as you keep encountering the same Pokémon in shaking grass patches, with the shiny odds improving the higher your chain gets. At a chain of 40 encounters, the shiny rate reaches its maximum boost, making it significantly more likely that the next encounter will produce a shiny. This system rewards patience and careful execution, as breaking the chain by encountering a different species or failing to find shaking grass resets your progress to 0. What makes the Poké-Radar interesting from a mechanical perspective is how it gamifies the shiny hunting process. Instead of relying purely on random chance over thousands of encounters, the Poké-Radar gives players a system they can engage with, a set of rules and behaviors to master in order to improve their odds. The method requires understanding which grass patches to choose, how to maintain chains without breaking them, and when to reset if things go wrong. It transforms shiny hunting from a passive waiting game into an active, skill-based challenge. However, the Poké-Radar also introduces new ways to fail. A broken chain means all your accumulated progress is lost, and you have to start over from the beginning. This creates moments of intense frustration when a chain breaks at 39 encounters, just one short of maximum odds, or when a carefully maintained 40 chain ends because you got unlucky with grass patch placement. The system gives players more control over their shiny hunting, but that control comes with the possibility of failure that feels worse than simple bad luck, because it often involves mistakes you made rather than pure randomness. The Poké-Radar represents a broader design philosophy in modern Pokémon games, where shiny hunting methods have evolved from pure random encounters to complex systems with rules and optimizations. Each generation introduces new mechanics, new methods, new ways to manipulate or improve shiny odds. The Poké-Radar is one of many such systems, sitting alongside Friend Safari in X and Y, SOS chaining in Sun and Moon, and Dynamax Adventures in Sword and Shield. Each method offers its own balance of effort, skill, and randomness, appealing to different types of players with different preferences for how they want to hunt. The evolution of shiny hunting mechanics shows that how Game Freak has responded to community interest in shinies over time. What started as a completely random rare occurrence has gradually been given more structure, more ways for players to actively pursue these creatures rather than simply hoping to stumble upon them. The Poké-Radar and similar mechanics acknowledge that players want agency in their shiny hunts, want to feel like they're working toward a goal rather than just rolling dice endlessly. By providing these systems, the games validate shiny hunting as a legitimate form of gameplay rather than just a strange quirk some players care about. In Pokémon Sword and Shield, there's a glitched area called the Void that players can access through careful manipulation of the game's boundaries. The Void is an out-of-bounds region where normal game rules don't fully apply, a space that exists in the game's code, but wasn't meant to be reachable during the normal play. Getting to the void requires exploiting specific collision detection errors, walking through walls, or off the edges of normally solid boundaries until you end up in empty space beyond the game's designed areas. Once there, you can move freely through an endless expanse with no terrain, no NPCs, and no scripted events. What makes the void interesting for shiny hunters is a peculiar property of how location data is recorded for Pokémon. The game stores where each Pokémon was caught or hatched, and normally this would be a specific route, city, or landmark with a proper name. But in the void, far enough from any named location, the game defaults to marking Pokémon as being from a faraway place, the same generic location tag used for Pokémon transferred from older generations. By bringing eggs to the void and hatching them there, players can obtain Pokémon with the faraway place tag even though they were actually hatched in the current game. This creates opportunities for interesting and slightly deceptive shiny hunting. A player could hatch a shiny Pokémon that only exists in Generation 8, something that couldn't possibly have been transferred from an older game, yet have it display the faraway place location tag that normally indicates a transfer. This creates a small mystery, a Pokémon whose origin doesn't quite make sense at first glance. For players who enjoy the collector aspect of Pokémon, having shinies with unusual or impossible location tags adds another layer of interest to their collection. The void itself represents the kind of unintended space that exists in most open-world games, areas beyond the boundaries that players were never supposed to reach. In Sword and Shield, these spaces are particularly accessible due to how the wild area's collision detection works, allowing players to clip through barriers more easily than in previous games. Once the void was discovered, it became a popular destination for players interested in exploiting its properties, not just for the faraway place location tag, but also for accessing certain areas early or triggering events out of their intended sequence. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter the question of what counts as legitimate gameplay. The void isn't supposed to be accessible, and using it to obtain Pokémon with unusual location tags could be seen as a form of cheating, even though no external devices or modified software are required. Yet the void exists entirely within the game's normal code, reachable through actions the game allows even if it doesn't intend them. This ambiguity creates space for players to decide their own boundaries around what feels acceptable and what doesn't. The relationship between Pokémon games and glitches has always been complicated. Some glitches, like the missing no, exploit in Generation 1, have become beloved parts of the series' history, widely used and fondly remembered. Others, like the void in Sword and Shield, exist in a grayer area where their use depends on individual player ethics and goals. Game Freak's response to these glitches has varied over time, sometimes patching them out in updates and sometimes leaving them intact, perhaps recognizing that part of the community enjoys finding and exploiting these unintended features. In Generation 2, there's a specific combination of events that can cause the game to corrupt save data in a way that's difficult to recover from. If a player saves their game while the battery is low, and that battery dies during the save process, the save file can end up partially written, containing some correct data and some garbage values that the game can't properly interpret. When attempting to load this corrupted save, the game might freeze, display error messages, or in some cases load into a broken game state where the player character is stuck in walls or essential NPCs have disappeared. This kind of save corruption was more common in the era of cartridge-based games where saves were stored on battery-backed RAM. The batteries in Generation 2 cartridges were designed to last for years, but they weren't immortal, and as the games aged, battery-related save corruption became more frequent. Players who had kept their gold, silver, or crystal cartridges since childhood might one day turn on the game to find that their save file had vanished or become unloadable, the battery having finally died and taken years of progress with it. The emotional impact of losing a save file to corruption can't be overstated. For many players, these saves represented not just hours of gameplay, but memories of childhood, teams they'd built and cared about, events they'd participated in, and Pokémon they'd traded for with friends. When a save file corrupts, all of that disappears, leaving only the knowledge that it once existed. Modern games with cloud saves and backup systems have made this kind of loss less common, but for Generation 2 players, save file corruption was a real risk that hung over every playthrough. Game Freak eventually addressed the battery issue in later re-releases of Generation 2 games, moving to flash memory storage that didn't require the battery to maintain saves. The Virtual Console releases of Gold, Silver, and Crystal on the 3DS use emulation with save states that persist without physical batteries, making corruption much less likely. But for players with original cartridges, the battery remains a ticking clock, a component that will eventually fail and potentially take the save data with it when it goes. The knowledge that Generation 2 saves are fragile has led to a preservation community focused on backing up old cartridges before their batteries die. Using specialized hardware, players can extract save files from cartridges and store them digitally, preserving the data even after the original battery fails. This process requires specific tools and technical knowledge, but it allows players to maintain save files from decades ago, keeping alive the teams and progress they accumulated in childhood. The preservation community represents a way of fighting against the inevitable decay of physical media, ensuring that games saves outlast the hardware they were created on. In Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, there's a legendary Pokémon encounter with Rayquaza that includes a hidden detail most players would never notice unless they were specifically looking for it. When you approach Rayquaza at the top of Sky Pillar, the game loads a specific background music track that plays during the encounter. However, the music that plays during the Rayquaza battle is actually a slightly modified version of the standard legendary battle theme, with subtle differences in instrumentation and tempo that set it apart from battles with Groudon or Kyogre. These musical variations aren't random. They're carefully composed to match the legendary Pokémon you're encountering. Rayquaza's battle theme has a more ethereal quality than Groudon's, with higher pitches and faster rhythms that evoke the sky and wind. Most players experiencing the battle for the first time wouldn't consciously notice these differences, but they contribute to the feeling that each legendary encounter is unique and special. The music helps establish the atmosphere and tone, subtly reinforcing that you're facing something different from ordinary wild Pokémon or even other legendaries. The attention to musical detail in Pokémon games often goes unrecognized because music works subconsciously, shaping how we feel about moments without explicitly calling attention to itself. A good soundtrack makes you feel excited during important battles, relaxed in safe towns, and tense in dangerous areas, all without you necessarily thinking, "This music is making me feel this way." The Rayquaza battle theme is effective because it enhances the encounter without overwhelming it, providing an audio backdrop that feels appropriate without demanding conscious attention. Game Freak's music team has consistently put enormous effort into creating varied and memorable soundtracks for every Pokémon game. Each route has its own theme, each town has its own melody, and each important battle has music carefully designed to match the moment. The subtle variations in legendary battle themes represent just one example of this attention to detail, one way that music contributes to making each encounter feel distinct and meaningful. For players who pay attention to soundtracks, these variations are delightful discoveries. For everyone else, they work invisibly, shaping the experience without announcing themselves. In Pokémon Black and White, there's a hidden mechanic related to how the camera moves during battles that adjusts based on the size and position of the Pokémon on screen. When a particularly large Pokémon enters battle, the camera zooms out slightly to ensure the entire sprite fits within the frame. Similarly, when a very small Pokémon appears, the camera zooms in to keep the sprite from looking too tiny relative to the background. These zoom adjustments happen automatically and seamlessly, maintaining visual consistency across battles with hundreds of different species. What makes this interesting is how much work went into creating a system that most players would never consciously notice. The camera movements are smooth and subtle enough that they don't draw attention to themselves. They simply ensure that every Pokémon looks appropriately sized relative to the battlefield. Without this system, battles would feel inconsistent, with some Pokémon appearing too large or too small for the space they occupy. The dynamic camera adjusts for these size differences automatically, creating a more polished and professional presentation. This kind of invisible quality of life system represents significant development effort spent on something that produces no obvious feature to advertise. Players don't see dynamic battle camera listed on the back of the box, and reviews rarely mention it because it's not flashy or noticeable, but it makes the game better in subtle ways, smoothing out rough edges and ensuring visual consistency. The battles in Black and White feel better than they would without the camera adjustments, even though most players couldn't tell you exactly why. Game development is full of these invisible systems, mechanics that exist purely to prevent problems rather than to create obvious features. The dynamic battle camera in Black and White prevents size inconsistencies from becoming distracting or immersion breaking. It's a solution to a problem most players would never think about because the solution works well enough to make the problem invisible. Only by looking at how the game actually functions behind the scenes do you discover these careful adjustments, these small touches that add up to a more polished experience. In Pokémon Diamond and Pearl, there's a location called the Old Chateau where ghost-type Pokémon can be encountered in an atmospheric abandoned mansion. The Old Chateau is designed to be creepy, with dark rooms, mysterious portraits, and an overall sense of unease that sets it apart from most other locations in the game. However, there are additional elements hidden in the mansion that only appear under very specific conditions, details that make the location even more unsettling if you happen to encounter them. In one room of the mansion, if you stand in exactly the right position at exactly the right time, a ghostly figure will appear briefly in the background before vanishing. The figure is part of the scenery, not an interactable NPC or a Pokémon, just a sprite that appears and disappears to create atmosphere. Most players will never see this figure because they won't happen to be standing in the correct spot when the trigger conditions are met. For those who do see it, the experience can be genuinely startling, a moment of unexpected horror in a game that's typically lighthearted and cheerful. Similar ghostly apparitions appear in other rooms of the Old Chateau under different conditions. There's a floating girl in one hallway, an old man in another room, each appearing briefly before fading away. These apparitions serve no gameplay purpose. They can't be interacted with, don't provide items, and have no impact on your progress through the mansion. They exist purely to create atmosphere, to make the Old Chateau feel genuinely haunted rather than just aesthetically spooky. The fact that they're so rare and conditional makes them feel more real when you do encounter them, like genuine ghost sightings rather than scripted events. The Old Chateau's hidden apparitions represent a particular approach to environmental storytelling in Pokémon games. Instead of explaining everything through text or dialogue, the mansion tells its story through atmosphere and rare visual events. The game never explicitly states that the old chateau is haunted or provides a backstory for the ghostly figures. They simply exist, appearing and disappearing according to their own mysterious rules, leaving players to wonder what they saw and what it means. This restraint makes the location more effective, allowing the mystery to remain mysterious rather than being explained away. For players who explore thoroughly and spend time in the old chateau, the ghostly apparitions reward that exploration with moments of genuine surprise. For players who rush through the location, the apparitions might never appear at all, remaining hidden possibilities they never discovered. This creates different experiences of the same location depending on how you engage with it, rewarding patience and thorough exploration with content that more hurried players will miss entirely. The old chateau becomes what you make of it, an ordinary mansion if you pass through quickly, or a genuinely unsettling haunted house if you take the time to explore. In Pokémon Sun and Moon, there's a feature called Festival Plaza that serves as a hub for online multiplayer features and minigames. The plaza includes various shops and facilities that you can unlock and upgrade by participating in activities and spending festival coins earned through missions and interactions with other players. However, one of the features in Festival Plaza has an extremely low drop rate that makes it nearly impossible for most players to obtain without excessive grinding. This feature is a specific type of rare shop called the Big Dreams Lottery Shop, which has less than a 1% chance of appearing in your plaza rotation. The Big Dreams shop is valuable because it offers rare items and services that can't be easily obtained elsewhere in the game. However, because the shop appears so rarely in the random rotation of available facilities, many players will complete the entire game without ever seeing it. The low appearance rate creates a situation where players who want access to the Big Dreams shop have no reliable way to make it appear. They simply have to keep refreshing their plaza and hoping to get lucky. This randomness frustrates players who value efficiency and planning, as there's no skill or strategy that can improve your odds of seeing the shop. The Festival Plaza's random rotation system represents a design choice that prioritizes long-term engagement over immediate player satisfaction. By making certain features rare and random, the game encourages players to return repeatedly, checking their plaza regularly to see if the desired shop has appeared. This approach can work to maintain player interest over months or years, but it can also frustrate players who feel like they're being asked to waste time on meaningless repetition. The Big Dream shop's extreme rarity pushes this design philosophy to its limits, creating a feature that's so rare it might as well not exist for many players. For players who do eventually encounter the Big Dream shop, the moment feels rewarding precisely because it's so rare. The rarity creates value, making the shop feel special and worth using when it finally appears. This is the intended effect of the random rotation system, to create moments of excitement and discovery when rare elements show up. However, for every player who experiences that excitement, there are likely many more who never see the shop at all and simply feel frustrated by the lack of control over which facilities their plaza offers. The system succeeds at creating rare, exciting moments, but potentially at the cost of alienating players who don't have the patience for extreme randomness. In Pokémon Platinum, there's a side quest involving the legendary Pokémon Giratina that includes a hidden detail about how the game tracks which Pokémon you've caught. If you defeat Giratina during your first encounter instead of catching it, the Pokémon will respawn after you become champion, giving you another opportunity to catch it. However, the game stores a flag indicating that you defeated Giratina once, and this flag affects certain NPC dialogue throughout the game. One specific NPC will have different dialogue if you defeated Giratina versus if you caught it on the first encounter, acknowledging your choice in a way that most players would never notice. This kind of reactive dialogue represents the level of detail that Pokémon games sometimes include to acknowledge player choices. The game is tracking what you do and adjusting small elements of the world to reflect your actions. Most players won't encounter the alternate dialogue because they'll either catch Giratina on the first try or won't happen to talk to that specific NPC after defeating it. But for players who do encounter both versions of the dialogue, it creates a sense that the world is responding to their actions, that their choices matter even in small ways. The decision to include this kind of reactive content speaks to a development philosophy that values detail and reactivity even when most players won't see it. Programming alternate dialogue for a single NPC based on whether the player caught or defeated a legendary Pokémon is extra work that produces minimal obvious benefit. Most players will experience only one version of the dialogue and won't know the alternative exists. Yet the developers included it anyway, creating depth and reactivity that rewards thorough exploration and multiple playthroughs. These hidden reactive elements accumulate across Pokémon games, creating worlds that feel more alive and responsive than they might appear at first glance. Not every NPC has dynamic dialogue, and not every choice you make is acknowledged, but enough of them are that the games feel like they're paying attention to what you do. The Giratina dialogue flag in Platinum is just one example of many such details, a small acknowledgement that the game knows what you did and is adjusting itself accordingly. In Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green, there's a mechanic related to the V's Seeker item that allows you to re-battle trainers you've already defeated. The V's Seeker can be used repeatedly to check if any trainers in your current area are ready for a rematch, with availability determined by a combination of time, past, and random chance. However, there's a hidden element to how the V's Seeker determines which trainers will be available. Certain trainers have higher or lower priority in the availability calculation, meaning some trainers will offer rematches more frequently than others, even though the game never explains this priority system. The priority system isn't documented anywhere in the game, and most players would assume that trainer availability is completely random or based purely on time. However, data miners have discovered that each trainer has a hidden priority value that affects how often they appear as available for rematches. Trainers with high priority values will show up ready for battle more frequently when you use the V's Seeker, while low priority trainers will rarely be available even if you've been away from the area for a long time. This hidden priority system creates an invisible tier of trainer availability that shapes the player's experience without their knowledge. Players who frequently use the V's Seeker for grinding or money-making will start to notice that they battle certain trainers much more often than others, but they might attribute this to luck rather than realizing it's a designed system. The trainers who appear most frequently become familiar opponents, while low-priority trainers might only be battled once or twice, despite dozens of V's Seeker uses in their area. The choice to implement a priority system rather than purely random availability suggests that Game Freak wanted some control over which trainers players would encounter most frequently during V's Seeker grinding. Perhaps high-priority trainers offer better experience or money, making them more valuable rematches. Or perhaps the system was designed to create variety by ensuring that not every trainer has an equal chance of appearing, preventing the V's Seeker experience from feeling too uniform. Whatever the reason, the hidden priority values create an invisible structure beneath what appears to be a simple random system. In Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, there's a feature called DexNav that allows players to search for specific Pokémon in the wild with enhanced abilities or moves. The DexNav shows a silhouette of potential Pokémon in the area and lets you sneak up on them for a chance to encounter species with unusual properties. However, The Dex Nav also includes a hidden level system that tracks how many times you've encountered each species, with higher levels unlocking better potential Pokémon with improved IVs, hidden abilities, and egg moves. The Dex Nav level system isn't explained clearly in the game, and many players use the feature without realizing that their searches are becoming more effective the more they use it. Each successful encounter with a species increases your Dex Nav level for that Pokémon, gradually improving the quality of future encounters. At high Dex Nav levels, you can consistently find Pokémon with perfect IVs and multiple stats, hidden abilities that are normally very rare, and egg moves that would typically require breeding to obtain. This turns the Dex Nav into a powerful tool for players who understand how it works, but a mediocre feature for those who don't. The lack of clear explanation creates a knowledge gap between players who research mechanics online and those who rely only on in-game information. Players who understand Dex Nav levels can use the feature to hunt for competitive-ready Pokémon with excellent stats and rare abilities. Players who don't understand the system might use the Dex Nav casually without realizing they're missing out on its full potential. This knowledge gap is common in Pokémon games, where many powerful mechanics exist but aren't clearly explained, creating an information hierarchy where knowledgeable players have significant advantages. The Dex Nav level system represents a trend in modern Pokémon games toward complex, layered mechanics that reward deep engagement and research. Simple surface-level use provides basic benefits, but understanding the underlying systems unlocks much more powerful applications. This design encourages players to engage with online communities, guides, and data mining resources to learn how features truly work. For some players, this research and optimization is part of the fun. For others, it's frustrating to discover they've been using features inefficiently because the game didn't explain them properly. In Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky, there's a hidden mechanic related to how Wonder Mail missions are generated that can occasionally produce impossible or glitched missions. Wonder Mail allows players to share missions with others by exchanging codes, with each code representing a specific dungeon objective. However, the code generation system sometimes produces missions with parameters that can't actually be completed, such as requesting an item that doesn't exist in the specified dungeon or asking you to recruit a Pokémon that never appears in that location. These impossible missions can be accepted and attempted, but completion is impossible because the specified goal doesn't exist. Players who receive impossible Wonder Mail codes might spend hours searching for the required item or Pokémon without realizing the mission is broken. The glitched mission generation isn't common, but it happens often enough that communities sharing Wonder Mail codes have learned to verify missions before distributing them widely. Some impossible missions have become infamous in the Mystery Dungeon community, known broken codes that circulated before players realized they couldn't be completed. The existence of impossible Wonder Mail missions reveals limitations in the code generation system. The algorithm that creates mission codes doesn't include sufficient error checking to ensure that every generated mission is actually completable. It can produce codes that point to valid dungeons with valid objectives, but the combination of dungeon and objective doesn't work because the required element isn't present in that specific location. This kind of edge case in procedural generation shows how complex systems can produce unexpected results that developers didn't anticipate during testing. For players who encounter impossible missions, the experience can be frustrating, but also strangely fascinating. There's something compelling about a broken mission code, a set of instructions that appears valid but leads nowhere. It's like a puzzle that can't be solved, a quest that exists in the game's systems but not in its actual playable content. The impossible missions exist in a liminal space between functional game content and glitched nonsense, technically part of the Wonder Mail system, but fundamentally broken. In Pokémon Ranger Guardian Signs, there's a feature that allows players to download special missions through Wi-Fi distribution events. These missions were time-limited, available only during specific promotional periods, and once the event ended, the missions became permanently inaccessible to players who didn't download them. This created a form of missable content, where portions of the game could only be experienced by players who were actively playing during the right time window and had access to Wi-Fi connectivity. The time-limited nature of these missions frustrated players who discovered the game after events had ended or who lacked reliable internet access during the distribution period. Unlike main series Pokémon games where event distributions typically provided Pokémon that could be traded from other players, the Ranger missions were tied to individual save files and couldn't be shared. If you missed an event mission, there was no legitimate way to experience that content unless you obtained a new copy of the game that somehow still had the mission downloaded, which was extremely rare. Years after the game's release, the Wi-Fi distribution system that delivered these missions was shut down entirely, making it permanently impossible to obtain event missions through official means. Players who want to experience the full content of Guardian Signs now must resort to unofficial methods like hacked save files or modified distribution events created by fans. The official content still exists in the game's code, but there's no official path to access it, creating a form of abandoned content that exists but can't be reached. This approach to time-limited content represents a design philosophy that prioritizes event-driven engagement over long-term accessibility. By making missions available only during specific windows, the game created urgency and encouraged players to check in regularly for new content. However, this came at the cost of permanently locking out later players from portions of the game. The balance between creating timely events and ensuring lasting accessibility is difficult, and Guardian Signs leaned heavily toward the former, resulting in a game where significant content is now functionally lost to time for most players. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we encounter questions about preservation and access. When game content is time-limited and tied to online services that eventually shut down, what happens to that content? Is it lost forever, or does the community have a right to preserve it through unofficial means? Guardian Signs' inaccessible event missions sit at the center of this question, representing content that officially exists but can no longer be experienced through legitimate channels. In Pokémon XD Gale of Darkness, there's a mechanic called purification that allows players to restore shadow Pokémon to their normal state by reducing their heart gauge through battle and care. However, the purification system includes a hidden element where certain combinations of Pokémon in your party will provide passive heart gauge reduction even when you're not actively working on purifying. These passive reduction effects stack based on the types and species of Pokémon you're carrying, creating an optimization puzzle for players who want to purify shadow Pokémon as quickly as possible. The passive purification mechanics aren't explained clearly in the game, and many players will purify their shadow Pokémon through normal means without realizing they could have sped up the process significantly by optimizing their party composition. Players who research the mechanics and build parties specifically designed for rapid purification can complete the process much faster than those who approach it casually. This creates another knowledge gap where informed players have a significant efficiency advantage that the game never explicitly teaches. The hidden nature of passive purification bonuses represents a design choice that rewards experimentation and research without requiring it. Players who want to engage deeply with the system can discover or look up the optimization strategies and use them to their advantage. Players who prefer a more casual approach can still purify all their shadow Pokémon through normal gameplay. It just takes longer. This optional optimization creates depth for players who want it without making the game inaccessible for those who don't. What's interesting about XD's purification system is how it creates different playstyles within the same mechanical framework. Some players will view purification as a challenging optimization puzzle, carefully constructing parties to maximize heart gauge reduction and minimize time spent on the process. Others will treat it as a simple background task, occasionally checking their shadow Pokémon and purifying them when the gauge empties through normal play. Both approaches work, and the game accommodates both without forcing either one. In Pokémon Conquest, there's a mechanic related to warrior Pokémon link percentages that determines how well a warrior and Pokémon work together in battle. Higher link percentages provide stat bonuses and improved performance, while lower percentages result in weaker combinations. However, the game includes hidden multipliers that adjust link percentages based on specific warrior Pokémon pairings, with certain combinations receiving bonuses that aren't visible in the base calculation. These hidden bonuses can make unexpected pairings surprisingly effective, or explain why certain obvious combinations don't work as well as anticipated. The hidden link bonuses create a layer of complexity beneath the visible percentage system. A pairing that shows 90% link might actually perform better or worse than expected due to hidden multipliers that aren't displayed anywhere in the game's interface. Players who rely solely on visible link percentages might make suboptimal team-building decisions, while players who understand the hidden bonuses can construct more effective combinations. This hidden complexity rewards deep system knowledge, but can frustrate players who feel like they're being misled by the visible stats. Conquest's decision to include hidden link bonuses without explaining them represents a design philosophy that values discovery and experimentation. The game could have simply displayed the final modified link percentage. After all, bonuses are applied, giving players complete information to make decisions. Instead, it shows only the base percentage and leaves players to discover through testing that certain combinations perform differently than the numbers suggest. This approach creates mystery and encourages experimentation, but it also reduces transparency in a system where players are trying to make informed, strategic choices. The tension between hidden complexity and player information is a recurring theme in Pokémon game design. Many mechanics include hidden elements that aren't explained or displayed, creating knowledge hierarchies where informed players have advantages. Whether this approach enhances or diminishes the experience depends largely on individual player preferences. Some enjoy discovering hidden mechanics and using them to optimize their strategies. Others prefer complete information and find hidden mechanics frustrating or unnecessarily obscure. In Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee, there's a feature called Catch Combos that rewards players for catching the same species of Pokémon repeatedly without breaking the chain. Higher catch combos increase the chances of encountering rare Pokémon and shinies, with the bonuses maxing out at a combo of 31 catches. However, the game includes several hidden ways to break your combo that aren't clearly explained, leading to frustration when long chains break unexpectedly due to actions players didn't realize would reset their progress. The most common unexpected combo breaker is encountering a different species than the one you're chaining. If a different Pokémon appears on screen and you interact with it in any way, even if you run away without catching it, your combo breaks. Many players assume that running from an encounter won't affect their chain, but in Let's Go, even viewing the catch screen for a different species ends your combo. This has led to countless broken chains where players thought they were being safe by running from unwanted encounters, but were actually resetting their progress without knowing it. Another hidden combo breaker is leaving the area where you're hunting. Certain location boundaries will reset your combo if crossed, but the game doesn't clearly indicate which boundaries are safe and which aren't. Players have to learn through trial and error or online research which routes and areas allow free movement without breaking combos. This lack of clear communication creates frustration, especially for players who invest hours building high combos only to have them break due to crossing an invisible boundary they didn't know existed. The catch combo system in Let's Go demonstrates how lack of clarity in game mechanics can transform an exciting feature into a source of frustration. The core concept of rewarding consecutive catches of the same species is solid and creates engaging gameplay. But the hidden rules about what breaks combos and what doesn't turn the feature into a minefield, where players constantly worry about accidentally doing something that will reset their progress. Better communication about combo breaking actions would have preserved the system's benefits while reducing unnecessary frustration. In Pokémon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, there's a feature called Ultra Wormholes that allows players to travel through dimensional portals to catch legendary Pokémon from previous generations. The wormhole minigame involves steering through a tunnel and avoiding obstacles, with better performance leading to rarer Pokémon at the destination. However, the minigame includes a hidden scoring system that's more complex than it appears, with multiple factors contributing to the final rarity tier of the Pokémon you'll encounter. Distance traveled, number of rings passed through, and obstacles avoided all factor into the wormhole score, but they're weighted differently and combined in non-obvious ways. Players who assume that simply traveling far or avoiding all obstacles will guarantee the best results might be disappointed to find that they still encounter common Pokémon. The optimal strategy requires balancing multiple factors simultaneously, prioritizing certain rings over distance, and sometimes intentionally taking minor hits to maintain the ideal path through the tunnel. The complexity of the wormhole scoring system creates a skill ceiling where practice and understanding lead to better results. Experienced players can consistently reach high rarity wormholes by optimizing their routes and understanding which factors matter most. New players might struggle to find anything beyond common encounters because they don't understand how the scoring works. This skill-based system rewards mastery, but can feel unfair to players who don't realize they're missing crucial information about how to play effectively. Ultra Wormholes represent an attempt to gamify legendary Pokémon encounters, transforming them from simple button-pressing battles into skill-based challenges. The approach is creative and adds replay value to legendary hunting, but the lack of clear explanation about scoring mechanics creates unnecessary barriers to entry. A more transparent scoring display or better tutorial information could have preserved the skill-based challenge while making the system more accessible to players who don't research optimal strategies online. In Pokémon Stadium for the Nintendo 64, there's a peculiar inconsistency in how certain moves are animated compared to their Game Boy counterparts. The move Earthquake, for example, creates a dramatic shaking effect in Stadium where the entire battlefield tilts and rocks, with pieces of terrain visibly crumbling. This theatrical representation makes Earthquake feel powerful and devastating in a way the simple Game Boy text descriptions never could. However, the animation doesn't match how Earthquake actually works mechanically in the games, creating a disconnect between visual representation and game function. Stadium's animations prioritize spectacle over mechanical accuracy, choosing to make moves look impressive even if the visual didn't perfectly represent what was happening in the code. This was a deliberate choice given the technical capabilities of the Nintendo 64, which could render three-dimensional battles that the Game Boy's two-dimensional sprites couldn't match. The developers decided that making moves look and feel powerful was more important than creating animations that precisely reflected the mathematical damage calculations happening behind the scenes. For players experiencing Stadium, the animations added weight and impact to battles that felt more immediate and visceral than the abstract numbers of the handheld games. The choice to prioritize visual spectacle created a version of Pokémon battles that felt different from the source material while still recognizing familiar. Earthquake still hit all adjacent Pokémon in double battles, still dealt damage based on the same stats and type matchups, but looked completely different when rendered in 3 dimensions. This split between mechanical consistency and visual interpretation would continue through later console Pokémon games, each finding its own balance between staying true to the source material and leveraging new hardware to create more dramatic presentations. In the Pokémon trading card game for Game Boy Color, there's a specific AI opponent named Ronald who uses a deck focused on water-type Pokémon. Ronald appears in the Water Club and presents a moderate challenge for players progressing through the game's story mode. However, Ronald has a peculiar behavior in how he plays his energy cards. He will almost always attach an energy to his active Pokémon even when he has benched Pokémon that would benefit more from the energy, creating suboptimal plays that careful players can exploit. This isn't a random occurrence or occasional mistake. It's a consistent pattern in how his AI is programmed to make decisions. The predictability of Ronald's energy attachment creates an exploitable weakness in his strategy. Players who recognize the pattern can use it to their advantage, setting up situations where Ronald wastes, turns attaching energy to a Pokémon that can't effectively use it while leaving his bench underdeveloped. This kind of AI flaw is common in older games, where processing limitations made it difficult to program truly intelligent opponents. Instead, the AI follows relatively simple decision trees that can be gamed once you understand the rules governing its behavior. What makes Ronald's AI interesting is how representative it is of the larger challenge in creating computer opponents for strategic games. A perfect AI that always makes optimal plays would be too difficult for most players and would feel unfair. But an AI that's too predictable or makes obviously bad decisions feels boring and removes the challenge. The trading card game's AI, including Ronald, sits somewhere in the middle, competent enough to provide resistance, but flawed enough that skilled players can consistently win. Ronald's energy attachment pattern is just one of many small quirks across different opponents that define their difficulty and personality. In Pokémon Colosseum, there's a feature that tracks which shadow Pokémon you've snagged from opposing trainers throughout the story. The game maintains a complete record of every shadow Pokémon you've encountered and whether you successfully caught it or let it escape. However, if you defeat a trainer who has a shadow Pokémon without snagging it, that Pokémon becomes temporarily unavailable and you'll need to re-battle the trainer later to get another chance. What's hidden about this system is that the game stores different dialogue for trainers you re-battle specifically because you missed their shadow Pokémon, acknowledging your return in ways that wouldn't trigger if you'd caught the Pokémon the first time. This reactive dialogue creates a subtle acknowledgement of player failure that most players might not notice. The trainer doesn't explicitly say, "You came back because you missed my shadow Pokémon," but the dialogue is different enough that attentive players can tell the game knows why they're there. It's a small touch that adds personality to what could have been a simple repeat battle, giving the world a sense of memory and continuity that extends beyond just tracking catch rates. The decision to program different dialogue for rebattles shows attention to detail in how Colosseum handled its shadow Pokémon system. The developers could have simply let players re-battle trainers with the same generic dialogue every time, but instead chose to create branching text that responded to the specific circumstances of why you're fighting again. This kind of contextual awareness makes the game feel more responsive and alive, even in a feature that most players will use sparingly if they're being careful about catching shadow Pokémon on the first try. In Pokémon Red and Blue, there's a glitch related to how the game handles stat modifications during battle that can occasionally cause stats to roll over into incorrect values. When a Pokémon's stat is modified multiple times through moves like Sword Stance or Amnesia, the game uses a multiplication system to track the increases. However, if the modified stat value exceeds the maximum number the game can store in that variable, it wraps around to a very small number, instead, effectively crippling the Pokémon that was trying to boost its stats. This overflow glitch is rare in normal gameplay because it requires stacking many stat boosts on a single Pokémon more than most battles would ever involve. But in specific situations, particularly when using X items repeatedly, or when facing opponents who keep using stat-boosting moves, the overflow can occur and produce confusing results. A Pokémon that should be incredibly powerful after multiple boosts suddenly becomes weak, its attack or defense stat displaying as a tiny fraction of what it should be. The visual effect is bizarre and can completely turn a battle that seemed won into a sudden loss. Game Freak fixed this overflow glitch in later generations by changing how stat modifications are calculated and stored, preventing the wraparound effect that caused the problem in Generation 1. Modern Pokémon games' cap stat increases at a maximum multiplier rather than allowing unlimited stacking, which eliminates the overflow issue while also balancing gameplay by preventing extreme stat boosting strategies. The fix was necessary both from a technical standpoint, preventing glitches, and from a game design standpoint, preventing broken strategies that trivialize battles. The stat overflow glitch in Red and Blue represents the kind of unexpected behavior that emerges when programming complex systems under memory constraints. The developers had to use specific variable types and storage methods to fit the battle system into the Game Boy's limited memory, and those choices created edge cases where the system could break if pushed far enough. Most players never encountered the glitch, but for those who did, it was a confusing and frustrating experience that seemed to contradict the basic rules of how stat modifications should work. In Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, there's a feature where your lead Pokémon follows behind you as you walk through the game world, visible as a sprite that matches whatever species is first in your party. This following Pokémon can be interacted with by turning around and pressing the button to check on it, which produces different messages depending on the Pokémon's happiness, species, and current location. However, the interaction system includes hundreds of unique responses based on specific combinations of Pokémon and locations, creating an enormous amount of hidden dialogue that most players will only see a small fraction of during a normal playthrough. Certain Pokémon have special reactions when brought to specific locations that reference their lore or design. Bringing a Pikachu to the Viridian Forest produces unique dialogue acknowledging the location's significance as Pikachu's natural habitat. Taking a Magikarp to the Lake of Rage triggers special text that reflects the location's connection to Gyarados. These contextual responses add depth to the following Pokémon feature, making it more than just a visual novelty by connecting Pokémon to places in ways that feel meaningful and intentional. The sheer number of unique interaction messages in Heart Gold and Soul Silver reveals how much effort went into making the following Pokémon feature feel personal and varied. Instead of recycling the same generic messages for every species, the developers wrote specific dialogue for different Pokémon types, personalities, and locations. This attention to detail made the feature more engaging for players who took the time to experiment with different Pokémon in different places, rewarding exploration and party variety with new text that added character to each species. What's remarkable about Heart Gold and Soul Silver's following Pokémon dialogue is that it was entirely optional content. The game would have functioned perfectly fine with much simpler generic messages, and most players wouldn't have complained. But the developers chose to invest resources in creating hundreds of unique responses anyway, adding a layer of polish and personality that elevated the feature from a simple gimmick to something that genuinely enhanced the connection between players and their Pokémon. It's the kind of decision that reflects a commitment to quality beyond what's strictly necessary. In Pokémon Crystal, there's a unique feature that allows players to choose whether their character is male or female, the first time the series offered this option. However, this choice affects more than just the player character's appearance. Throughout the game, certain NPCs have different dialogue depending on the player's gender, and a few trainers only appear for one gender or the other. These gender-specific differences create slightly different experiences of the same game, with male and female players encountering variations in story beats and NPC interactions that the other gender won't see. The most notable gender-specific content in Crystal involves a character who appears as a potential romantic interest, changing gender to match the player character's choice. This character expresses interest in the player through dialogue that's more explicitly romantic than most other NPC interactions in Pokémon games. The romance subplot is subtle and never becomes a major story element, but it adds a human dimension to the game that previous entries lacked. Players who chose different genders on different playthroughs would encounter different versions of this subplot, creating distinct experiences based on a single choice made at the beginning of the game. The decision to include gender choice and gender-specific content in Crystal represented a significant step forward for the series in terms of player expression and representation. Prior games had locked players into a single male protagonist with no options for customization. Crystal's addition of gender choice, while simple by modern standards, opened the door for future games to offer more extensive character customization and acknowledgement of player identity. The feature was well received enough that every mainline Pokémon game since has included gender choice as a standard option. What's interesting about Crystal's implementation of gender choice is how thoroughly it was integrated into the game, despite being a new feature added to what was essentially an enhanced version of Gold and Silver. The developers didn't just swap character sprites, they actually went through the game and adjusted NPC dialogue, trainer appearances, and story elements to reflect the player's choice. This level of integration suggests that gender choice was considered an important addition worth the extra development time required to implement it properly across the entire game. In Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, there's a legendary Pokémon trio consisting of Regirock, Regice, and Registeel that can only be encountered after solving a complex puzzle involving Braille, dive spots, and specific actions that aren't explained anywhere in the game. The puzzle requires players to interpret Braille messages, navigate to specific locations, and perform actions in a particular order to unlock the chambers where each Regi resides. Without external guides or extraordinary persistence, most players would never discover how to access these Pokémon during a normal playthrough. The Regi puzzle represents one of the most obscure secrets in Pokémon history, requiring knowledge and actions so specific that solving it without help feels nearly impossible. Players need to know Braille or have access to a translation guide, understand that certain rock formations can be interacted with in specific ways, and piece together cryptic clues spread across multiple locations. The puzzle doesn't provide clear feedback when you're on the right track, and many of the required actions seem arbitrary without the context of the Braille messages explaining what you're supposed to do. Game Freak has never officially explained why they made the Reggie puzzle so obtuse and difficult. Some speculate it was meant to encourage community collaboration, creating a mystery that would require players to work together to solve. Others suggest it was simply an experiment in how obscure a secret could be while still being technically solvable. Whatever the intention, the Reggie puzzle became legendary within the Pokémon community, a challenge that defined an era before internet guides made every secret immediately accessible. For players who did solve the Reggie puzzle without help, the sense of accomplishment was immense. Deciphering the Braille clues, finding the hidden chambers, and finally encountering the legendary Pokémon felt like a genuine achievement earned through patience and problem solving. The puzzle transformed catching legendary Pokémon from a simple story beat into an archaeological expedition, a process of uncovering ancient secrets through careful interpretation of cryptic hints. This approach to legendary encounters hasn't been repeated in quite the same way in later games, making the Reggie puzzle a unique moment in the series' history. In Pokémon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, there's a glitch involving the man in Oreburgh City who gives the player a Pokéch, the game's smartwatch device used for various functions. If players manipulate their position using specific movement inputs at the exact moment the man tries to give them the Pokéch, they can interrupt the script and receive the Pokéch while also remaining in a state where the game thinks they haven't received it yet. This creates a soft lock situation where certain story events won't progress because the game is waiting for a flag that will never be set properly. The Pokéch glitch is particularly devastating because it can occur early in the game and prevent progress through the main story. Players who accidentally trigger the glitch might not realize what went wrong until much later when they discover that certain NPCs won't interact with them or story events won't trigger. By that point, they may have invested hours into their playthrough, making the discovery that their save file is permanently broken feel especially cruel. The only solution is to start the game over from the beginning, losing all progress made on the corrupted save. This kind of progress blocking glitch highlights the fragility of story flags and scripted events in complex games. The Pokéch script was presumably tested during development, but the specific inputs required to trigger the glitch are unusual enough that they weren't caught before release. Once the game shipped and millions of players began interacting with it in unpredictable ways, edge cases like the Pokéch glitch emerged, revealing scenarios the developers hadn't anticipated. Game Freak never released a patch to fix the glitch, leaving players to learn through community warnings to avoid the specific inputs that could break their game. The existence of the Pokéch glitch in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum serves as a reminder that even carefully programmed games can contain devastating bugs that emerge from unexpected player behavior. The glitch doesn't require any special tools or hacking, just specific timing and movement that a player might accidentally perform during normal gameplay. For the unlucky players who triggered it without knowing what they were doing, the glitch transformed a positive moment in the game, receiving a useful tool into the beginning of a broken save file that couldn't be repaired. In Pokémon Black 2 and White 2, there's a location called the White Tree Hollow, or Black Tower, depending on which version you're playing, that serves as an extensive post-game challenge area. These areas consist of multiple floors filled with high-level trainer battles, with the difficulty increasing as you progress upward through the tower or downward through the hollow. However, hidden within these locations is a rare encounter system where certain floors can spawn legendary Pokémon from previous generations as extremely rare wild encounters. The legendary encounters in White Tree Hollow and Black Tower are so rare that many players who complete the entire area never see a single one. The encounter rate is deliberately set extremely low, making these legendary appearances more of an urban legend than a reliable hunting method. Players who do encounter legendaries in these areas often can't believe what they're seeing, wondering if they've stumbled onto a glitch or hacked content. But the encounters are legitimate, just extraordinarily rare, programmed into the game as ultra-rare surprises for the most persistent players. What makes these legendary encounters particularly interesting is that they don't replace the more common methods of obtaining these Pokémon. Most of the legendaries that can appear in White Tree Hollow and Black Tower are also available through other means, either as post-game roaming encounters or through special events. The Tower and Hollow encounters exist as an alternate path, a stroke of luck that might allow a player to catch a legendary they were planning to hunt through more reliable methods. This redundancy suggests the encounters were added as a bonus feature rather than as the intended way to obtain these Pokémon. The existence of ultra-rare legendary encounters in Black 2 and White 2 reflects a design philosophy that values surprise and unpredictability in post-game content. Not every reward needs to be guaranteed or easily obtainable. Sometimes the most memorable experiences come from unexpected moments when something incredibly rare happens without planning or preparation. The Tower and Hollow legendary encounters embody this philosophy, creating the possibility of amazing surprises for players who happen to be in the right place with the right luck. As we drift a little deeper into this topic, we see how Pokémon games have consistently included content that most players will never experience. Rare encounters, hidden dialogue, obscure puzzles, and glitched behaviors all exist in the margins of normal gameplay, creating layers of discovery for players willing to look deeper. These hidden elements don't fundamentally change the core experience of playing through the story and catching Pokémon, but they add texture and depth to the games that reward curiosity and persistence. In Pokémon Emerald, there's a cloning glitch involving the Battle Tower that allows players to duplicate Pokémon and items through careful timing of save file manipulation. The glitch requires depositing Pokémon into the PC, saving the game at a specific moment during the Battle Tower challenge, then turning off the console before the save completes. If executed correctly, this creates a save file that contains both the deposited Pokémon in the PC and the same Pokémon still in the player's party, effectively duplicating them along with any items they're holding. The Battle Tower cloning glitch became widely known in the Pokémon community and was extensively used by players who wanted to duplicate rare Pokémon or valuable items without trading. Shiny Pokémon, legendary Pokémon, and rare items like Master Balls could all be cloned through this method, giving players access to multiples of things that were supposed to be unique or limited. The glitch undermined the scarcity mechanics that were supposed to make certain Pokémon and items special, but it also provided a way for players to share rare finds with friends without permanently giving up their own copies. Game Freak was presumably aware of the cloning glitch, but chose not to patch it in later versions of Emerald. This decision might reflect an acknowledgement that some players valued the ability to duplicate Pokémon more than they valued strict scarcity enforcement. Or perhaps the glitch was too deeply embedded in how the save system worked to fix without risking other problems. Whatever the reason, the cloning glitch remained functional throughout Emerald's lifespan, becoming one of the game's most well-known features despite being entirely unintended. The cloning glitch represents a category of exploits that enhance player convenience at the cost of undermining designed limitations. For players who felt frustrated by the inability to get multiple legendary Pokémon, or who wanted to share their shinies with friends without trading them away, the glitch was a welcome tool that made the game more enjoyable. For players who valued the challenge and scarcity of rare Pokémon, the glitch's existence cheapened accomplishments by making everything duplicatable. Both perspectives are valid, and the glitch's legacy remains controversial among players with different values about what makes Pokémon meaningful. In Pokémon Sun and Moon, there's a Rotom character integrated into the player's Pokédex that provides commentary and advice throughout the adventure. Rotom Dex has a hidden friendship system that tracks how often you interact with it and how you respond to its dialogue prompts. Higher friendship levels unlock additional features like Rotom powers, temporary boosts that can be activated during gameplay. However, the friendship system includes specific interaction patterns that Rotom Dex responds to differently, with some patterns increasing friendship faster than others in ways the game never explicitly explains. The optimal way to raise Rotom Dex friendship involves interacting with it at specific intervals and responding to its questions in particular ways, but this information isn't provided in-game. Players who interact with Rotom Dex randomly or ignore it entirely will have much lower friendship than players who understand the underlying system and optimize their interactions. This creates yet another knowledge gap, where informed players unlock features faster, while casual players might complete the game without ever accessing higher-tier Rotom powers. Rotom Dex's hidden friendship mechanics represent a trend in modern Pokémon games towards systems that reward regular engagement and optimal interaction patterns. The game wants players to check in frequently and interact with its features consistently, using hidden progression systems to incentivize this behavior. For some players, this creates engaging daily routines and goals to work toward. For others, it feels like the game is demanding attention and punishing players who don't interact with it in exactly the right way. The decision to make Rotom Dex's friendship system partially hidden reflects a broader design philosophy in Sun and Moon, where many mechanics exist beneath the surface, requiring research or experimentation to fully understand. The game provides basic information about how features work, but withholds the details needed to use them optimally. This approach creates depth for players who enjoy optimization and research, while potentially frustrating players who prefer transparent systems they can understand without external resources. In Pokémon Sword and Shield, there's a curry-making minigame that allows players to cook meals with their Pokémon at camp. The curry system includes ratings based on how well you perform during the cooking process, with better ratings providing superior benefits to your Pokémon's stats and happiness. However, the rating system includes hidden factors beyond just the timing minigame performance, including the specific ingredients used, the berries selected, and even the types of Pokémon in your party during cooking. The hidden complexity of the curry rating system means that players who think they're doing everything right during the cooking minigame might still receive lower ratings than expected due to factors they don't realize matter. Ingredient quality, berry rarity, and Pokémon type combinations all contribute to the final rating in ways that aren't clearly explained. Players who research optimal curry recipes and party compositions can consistently achieve the highest ratings, while players relying only on in-game information might struggle to understand why their performance seems inconsistent. This hidden depth in the curry system represents a microcosm of broader design choices in Sword and Shield, where simple-seeming features contain layers of optimization that aren't immediately apparent. The game presents curry cooking as a casual, fun activity, but includes competitive elements for players who want to engage more deeply. This dual nature allows the feature to serve both casual players looking for a simple distraction and optimization-focused players seeking another system to master, though the lack of transparency about how ratings are calculated can create frustration for players in the middle who care about doing well but don't know what they're missing. In Pokemon Legends Arceus, there's a research system that tracks how much you've interacted with each Pokemon species through catching, battling, and observing specific behaviors. Completing research tasks for a species fills out its Pokédex entry and contributes to your overall research level, which gates progression through the story. However, the research system includes hidden multipliers for certain activities and bonus points for completing tasks in specific ways that aren't clearly explained in the game's interface. The hidden research multipliers reward players who understand the system's nuances, allowing them to progress faster by focusing on high-value activities. But for players who approach research casually, without understanding which tasks provide the best returns, progression can feel slower than it should. The game doesn't clearly communicate which research tasks are worth prioritizing or how to efficiently raise research levels, leaving players to either experiment extensively or seek outside guides for optimization strategies. Legends. Arceus's research system reflects a design choice to create depth through complex progression mechanics, but the lack of transparency creates barriers to understanding. The game wants players to engage deeply with the research system and rewards those who do, but it doesn't provide enough information for average players to engage effectively without external resources. This creates a familiar pattern where knowledge becomes power, and players with access to community resources and guides have significant advantages over those relying solely on in-game information. In Pokemon Yellow, there's a unique feature where Pikachu follows the player character around and can be interacted with to check its happiness level. This was the first time a Pokemon visibly followed the player in the overworld, predating the full party following feature in Heart Gold and Soul Silver by over a decade. However, Yellow's Pikachu has hidden happiness thresholds that affect not just the messages you receive when checking on it, but also impact certain story events and NPC interactions throughout the game. The happiness system in Yellow is more complex than it initially appears, with specific actions raising or lowering Pikachu's friendship in different amounts. Keeping Pikachu in your active party increases happiness, while letting it faint or storing it in the PC decreases it. Using items on Pikachu, winning battles with it, and simply walking around with it as your companion all contribute small amounts to its happiness over time. What makes this system particularly interesting is that certain happiness thresholds unlock unique dialogue from NPCs who comment specifically on how much your Pikachu likes you. These happiness-based interactions add narrative depth to Yellow in ways that other Generation 1 games lack. Your relationship with Pikachu becomes part of the story rather than just a mechanical system for evolving certain Pokemon. NPCs acknowledge your bond, making comments that change as your friendship deepens. This creates an emotional through line across the adventure, where you're not just collecting badges and defeating Team Rocket, you're also nurturing a relationship with your companion, Pokémon. The feature was beloved enough that it influenced future games, leading to the broader friendship mechanics that would become standard in later generations. In the Pokémon anime, there are several instances where Pokémon exhibit abilities or behaviors that don't match their game counterparts, creating contradictions between how species function in different media. Ash's Pikachu famously defeats a Raiden with an electric-type attack, despite Raiden having the ground typing that should make it immune to electric moves. The anime explains this by having Pikachu target Raiden's horn specifically, creating a weakness that doesn't exist in the game mechanics. These anime-exclusive interactions have occasionally influenced game design in subtle ways, with later games sometimes referencing or incorporating concepts that originated in the show. The relationship between the anime and games has always been complex. with each influencing the other while maintaining separate continuities and rules. The anime needs to create dramatic battles that are visually interesting and emotionally engaging, which sometimes requires bending or breaking the game's mechanical rules. Meanwhile, the games need to maintain consistent systems that work across hundreds of Pokémon and thousands of potential battle scenarios. This tension between dramatic storytelling and mechanical consistency creates two distinct versions of the Pokémon world that share aesthetics and characters, but function according to different underlying principles. For players who experience both the games and anime, these contradictions can be confusing or frustrating. A child who watches Pikachu defeat ground types on TV might expect the same to work in their game, only to discover that the rules are different. However, for most fans, the contradictions are simply accepted as part of how different media interpret the same source material. The anime tells stories, the games provide interactive experiences, and while they share a foundation, they don't need to be mechanically identical to both be valid interpretations of the Pokémon world. In Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire, there's a weather system that affects certain routes and areas, with rain, harsh sunlight, or sandstorms appearing based on the player's location. However, one route in particular, Route 119, has weather that changes based on in-game time rather than being fixed like other weather-affected areas. During morning hours, the route experiences rain, but in the afternoon, the weather clears to normal conditions. This time-based weather variation is unique to this specific route and wasn't repeated in the same way in later games. The dynamic weather on Route 119 creates a subtle environmental detail that most players might not consciously notice, but contributes to the sense that the game world operates according to its own internal logic. The fact that weather can change based on time suggests a living world where conditions shift naturally rather than remaining static. For players who pay attention to these details, the time-based weather adds another layer of immersion, making the routes feel less like static game levels and more like real places with their own atmospheric patterns. Game Freak has experimented with dynamic weather systems throughout the series, with some games featuring more elaborate implementations than others. The Hoenn region's weather patterns in Ruby and Sapphire were relatively simple, but they established a foundation that would be expanded in later generations. By the time of Sword and Shield's wild area, weather had become a central gameplay element that rotated on a daily basis and significantly affected which Pokémon could be encountered. The time-based weather on Route 119 in Hoenn represents an early step in this evolution toward more dynamic environmental systems. In Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green, there's a hidden mechanic involving the Teachy-TV, an item that provides tutorial information about various game systems. The Teachy-TV can be accessed from the Key Items pocket and plays short instructional videos about catching Pokémon, using items, and the understanding status conditions. However, the Teachy-TV includes content that changes based on your progress through the game, with new tutorials becoming available as you unlock new features and mechanics. This progressive tutorial system isn't clearly explained, and many players never realize that new content appears in the Teachy-TV as they advance through the story. The hidden progressive nature of the Teachy-TV's content reflects a tutorial design philosophy where information is provided when it becomes relevant rather than all at once at the beginning of the game. This approach prevents overwhelming new players with too much information before they need it, instead gradually introducing concepts as they become important. However, the lack of notification when new Teachy-TV content unlocks means that players who checked it once early in the game might never think to check again later, missing tutorials that could have helped them understand newer mechanics. The TGTV represents an attempt to integrate tutorial content into the game world in a way that feels optional and player-driven rather than forced. Players who want help can access the tutorials whenever they need them, while players who prefer to figure things out independently can ignore the feature entirely. This optional approach to tutorials became more common in later Pokémon games, which increasingly featured help systems that could be accessed on demand rather than mandatory tutorial sequences that interrupted gameplay. In Pokémon Platinum, there's a feature called the Battle Recorder that allows players to save videos of their battles and share them with others through Wi-Fi. However, the Battle Recorder has a hidden limitation where recordings can only be saved if the battle meets certain criteria related to length, number of turns, and types of moves used. Battles that are too short, too long, or involve certain glitches or unusual circumstances won't be recordable, with the game simply displaying an error message without clearly explaining why the recording failed. The hidden recording restrictions create frustration for players who want to save particularly impressive or unusual battles, only to discover they can't because some invisible threshold wasn't met. A player might have an amazing battle that they want to preserve and share, but if it lasted too many turns or involved a move that the recording system doesn't handle properly, it becomes impossible to save. This turns what should be a straightforward feature into something unpredictable, where whether you can record a battle depends on factors you can't control or anticipate. The Battle Recorder's limitations reflect the technical challenges of implementing video recording features in games before modern streaming and capture technologies became standard. The system had to compress battle data into a small enough format to be shared over Nintendo Wi-Fi connection, which meant excluding certain edge cases that would have made files too large or complex. While these restrictions made sense from a technical standpoint, the lack of clear communication about what could and couldn't be recorded made the feature feel unreliable and frustrating for players who wanted to use it. Thanks for watching. If you felt calm wandering through these soft moments, there's another video on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play as you settle in. It might guide you into an even deeper rest.